We're so glad to have y'all here this evening. I'm Ashley Belknap. I'm the Director of Engaging Disability with the Gospel. I live in Mississippi, just outside of Jackson, and we have 3 boys, all of whom have unique needs, 2 with autism, 1 with language disorders, and we are suspecting some learning disabilities there mixed in. All of them actually have language disorders, just a different combination of them in each child. So I wear tonight the director hat as well as the parent hat with you all. And that's a little bit of what Kristen was alluding to with the different flavor. I always come in with both hats because what you live, you end up teaching, and what you teach, you end up trying to apply in real life. But tonight, I really did want it to feel more like a parent conversation. I wanted to be in the trenches with you because I definitely feel like I've been there and am there since March of this year in a lot of ways with so many different challenges. And also with a topic like this and the scope of what each of us are going through and the limited amount of time, I also know that there's no possible way that I can set everybody up to thrive in every part of their lives. So what are my hopes and goals for tonight are that we can encourage you, number 1, to know that we're in these trenches with you, and number 2, that you'll find some nuggets of wisdom and perspective for the parenting journey that you're on. And then number 3, that you'll connect with us for more specifics, because that's what we're here to do. We, as Kristen alluded to, being free and available for consultations, but prior to the coronavirus, we did church consultations and family consultations all the time. And we still are getting calls, but it has definitely changed the nature of the phone calls lately, just because people aren't at church and we're regathering. And we're going to talk about some of those dynamics tonight as we go to just how it's taken us a few steps back to now just doing the very next thing instead of kind of proactively planning for ministry, or even in this case, proactively planning for our family in the summer, because so little can be counted on. So we are here for you. We're here for families. Our consultations are free. We are delighted to get to partner with you. So take advantage of us if that is of any interest as we kind of think towards what follows this. This is a conversation starter. So jumping in, surviving versus thriving, the first thing I want to say is one of the goals and missions of our ministry has always been that we don't just want our families present at church, we want them thriving. And since this is during the coronavirus seminar, where we've got a little bit of those dynamics where some of you may not be back at church physically, or most of you may not be. And so we're taking the topic of thriving and we're thinking about it more behind the scenes and at home. So what does it look like from having been home since March and having still a stretch of summer ahead and an uncertainty about the fall and school and services? What does it look like for us to keep our heads not just above water, but to actually have a plan and to swim with gusto and to find some joy in the process? So those are my goals. So I'm starting with a theme that I know everyone has seen just to get you smiling. I always talk about great expectations and gospel realities. And I feel like for many of us, our plans coming into this year took on a whole different scenario than what we've actually been living. Maybe you didn't think you'd be floating peacefully on a lake. Maybe you don't feel quite like you're fighting every battle sandy and wet. But somewhere in the middle of that are what we thought 2020 would hold, and then kind of where we are in the middle of the summer. And I don't know about you all, but for me, starting back in March, I did have a sense of expectation that we would eventually get to a place where things could be counted on, where we knew more, where there was more certainty in order to plan. It's really revealed how much I love to plan and have a good plan to run a family on. And then that gospel reality of how every week changes. And it's still like that, even in the middle of June, end of June. So our gospel realities are where we are with the resources we have, where God's put our feet, with the people around us that we have around us, and the situation and circumstances that we're facing each day. Even if we hadn't been in the middle of the virus, I always say our expectations are usually really high, and God comes in and does redemptive work in the places where we live that are usually under those expectations. Especially for parents of special needs kids, I feel like a lot of times our expectations, even if they're not as high as what our friends and peers may have, we still have that sense that we want to get to the next place. So we're always shooting higher than maybe we get to. So I have a quote here that I hope will be all on your screen. It looks like it may be a little cut off on the side. If you are a reader or have ever enjoyed Tolkien, this is a quote I took from The Two Towers, and it's from Samwise Gamgee. And so the whole epic battle that unfolds in Lord of the Rings, it is constant trying to get to the next place where the problems are solved. And so here's Samwise saying, it's all wrong. By all rights, we shouldn't even be here. And I'm sorry that it is cut off here. But for us, it's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo, the ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end, because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much had already happened? But it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come, and when the sun shines, it will shine out the clear. Those were the stories that stayed with you, that meant something, even if you were too small to understand why. So lots of wisdom and perspective told through story here, but alluding to that the great treasures that do come out of really hard circumstances make the sun brighter, make the realities that once we get to the other side of COVID-19, however long that is, will make us appreciate so much where we've been and then these new realities on the other side. And I love how this quote points us to, we think we'd really like to know the end of the story. We'd like to know whether it's a vaccine or whether it's whatever that tangible is that will solve our problem. We think we want to know, but here is that making us ponder, even if we knew the end, would we really be happy? Because there's still a process through which we have to walk through hard places, through darkness, through unknowns, this whole living life by faith. Where the walk and the journey is in this long same direction, but every step of it isn't as visible as we might like it to be. And even if it were, we would still have to keep walking. So some perspective for goal setting up front. I'm going to end at the very end by reading Hebrews 12, verses 1 and 2. It's kind of how do we find our joy and what does it really look like? But I'm going to set the tone for saying that in these two verses, that Jesus runs the race and ran the race for us. And it was an infinitely harder race than what we have to and are called to run. And he ran it with joy, which is part of the thrust of these verses, that let us persevere with joy because Christ has already done it. And he ran the race with joy. And he accomplished all the things that we couldn't accomplish. So as we think about where does our joy come from, how hard the race is, how long are we in this for, it brings me great encouragement to remember that Jesus ran an infinitely harder race for me, and he did it with joy. And then in that, I can rest and find joy because he's completed and finished the good work, which I may long to see happen in this world, and especially in the world of disability. Some of those longings may not ever come to fruition this side of heaven. So casting my hope on him as I set goals and as I run the race are key to having a heart that can find joy in the midst of the difficult and the unknown. And in this case, what seems like might stretch out for a really long time. So survival mode. I wanted to start with what I like to refer to as the four enemies of joy in parenting with special needs kids. And I think all of us at some point have probably been acquainted with these four. And if not, they will probably come to visit at some point in the future. But the likelihood is that we go in and out of all four of these often. They're friends that we know, even though we may not want them to come knocking on our door. But when they do, here's the question is, can we identify what these joy stealers are and how they're manifesting in our lives? And then what are some strategies for overcoming each of these four survival mode tendencies? So number one, I put is guilt. When I talk to parents across the PCA, the number one thing I always hear is that I'm not doing enough. I need to provide more, get access to more, get my kids on the right track to be able to, and fill in the blank, whether it is be mainstreamed into classes, or whether it's independent living, or whether it's to get a job, or whether it's just to get the next skill. There's always this sense of guilt, a pervasive feeling of not doing enough as a parent, or not doing things right. And who of us with special needs kids cannot identify with? You learn as you go with them. They are our teachers. And so there's a lot of learning in the negative, where you do something and then you say, well, that didn't work. Or, sometimes more with tears, that really didn't work. And I'd put a lot of hope that it would. And then also the part of guilt of making decisions that might mess up our kids in the long run. I think every parent struggles with that fear that if I don't do enough, or I do too much, or I do it in the wrong way, it will mess them up. Number two, frustration, that feeling of being upset or annoyed, particularly because of the inability to change or achieve something. And I took that straight from the dictionary. That resonates a lot with me and how things are feeling lately with the virus. It's a feeling of being frustrated because of the inability to change what is going on out there. It's revealed how little control we have. And it's not a matter of thinking harder about it that you'll actually get to the other side and solve the problem. There's a lot that's just stuck in the process of where we are. And then number three, fatigue, that lingering tiredness that is constant and limiting. And so I added and limiting to this definition because I feel like every special needs parent knows fatigue. We all live in a place of being tired and of wanting and longing for respite. But the fatigue we want to talk about tonight is the kind that limits us from doing what we want to do, or what we feel like we're called to do, or experiencing joy in the mundane because we're just so tired. And then number four, anger. And I put it last because a lot of times I feel like parents go through these other ones and then anger kind of bubbles out as the main emotion, the stronger emotion, when really there are other pieces of us that are trying to figure something out or express things, and anger is just kind of the conduit of which all that pent-up frustration or guilt or fatigue is released. But anger being the strong feeling of annoyance or displeasure or hostility. And I think here, when you get to anger, I could have just put this in a circle, because when you do get angry, what does that often lead you back to? Guilt, that you're not doing enough and that you're not enough. So we're going to take each of these. My goal here with each one of these is not to fully exhaust it, but to think about where it's coming from and a strategy, a gospel-centered strategy for combating it. Not the only strategy, but I tried to think and pick and work with something that would give you quality of life step to take, and not just something that you maybe have heard over and over again. So number one, we're going with guilt, that pervasive feeling of not doing enough. So I think of several origins of parent guilt. Number one, I think are our own insecurities. A lot of times we don't label those insecurities and talk about them openly for good reasons. Lots of fear of sharing those, but sometimes we don't share them because we don't even know them. We don't know exactly what we're insecure about. We just feel like we don't measure up to what everyone else expects of us. If you've joined us for online trainings before, you've heard me say that there's this fear that we will be too much for someone else or for a church. And so that constant feeling, that's an insecurity, that constant feeling that when my family comes as we really are, and we show up to a play date or church or just friends have come over, that we will be too much and that I can't change that, leads to those personal insecurities. And then number two, I think this one is a huge, huge influence in all of our lives, are the outside pressures. And probably the most outside pressure for homebound families impacted by disability is social media. Simply because we're home and we find times to connect with others that way for good and for not good. I think thinking about how we get our outside encouragement is part of what we'll talk about for finding joy. But what are those outside pressures that family, friends, social media, and other sources put on you that make you feel like you're not enough or that you're not doing enough for your child? I chose this picture in the life ring simply because, again, a great expectation here. Somewhere deep down in all of our hearts is this longing that this is what parenthood would look like, that you're walking through this field of red flowers and you are genuinely connected with the people you love, with strong arms and a gentle breeze blowing in the background with moss in the trees. And where we end up living in the midst of this is the flowers and the weeds and the strong arms that get weak and the moss that blows away. And if you're in the South, really hot, muggy days that don't have wind blowing, that just make everything feel more intense. And then the realities that your kids, special needs kids, might not even want to be picked up or join in on joint activities. So somewhere in the middle of all of that, again, rears parent guilt. So to add to that, parents of special needs kids feel pressure and isolation. I felt like in this particular category, just to add the pressure to constantly keep our kids growing can add to that feeling of guilt that parents who have typically developing kids may not experience. Even this summer, I would encourage you to think about how much are you focused on growing or the lack of growth that your kids are now encountering due to being homebound and lack of resources. What pressure are you putting on yourself or are you feeling to resolve that we've taken steps backwards? I'll give real life examples as we go, but I have one here who has become very, very loud in the absence of having other people to interact with. The few times that we have gotten out, I have noticed that we're shouting or even sometimes growling at people that get near us. And that's because we haven't been in communication in real life with a lot of people. And the skills you need on the computer are very different than the skills you need in real life. Mute works very well on Zoom, but you don't have a mute button in real life. And so I have realized as a parent, there is a skill now there that I feel pressure to help my children grow in. And I don't have a lot of access to venues to work on that. And so when we show up, I have a lot of guilt that I haven't done enough prep or enough whatever to work on the skill ahead of time so that we're successful. So that's one example of adding pressure to the already complex picture. And then isolation, I feel like makes everything worse. Figuring everything out without others in the same boat. We have always felt that way as special needs parents, that there's not a lot of people navigating this with us. But how much more do we feel that now when we're home? We're at least thankful everybody's home with us or has been home with us. And I mean, like friends down the way, the whole world came home and experienced what it's like to be less mobile. But there's still not as many out there who are practicing and walking this path that we are and are willing to process it with us. So what is a strategy for thriving, dealing with parent guilt? And as I said, I'm going with one strategy and two on one of them, but one strategy to try to just take the next step. And that one for here is decide on your one next goal and focus the largest part of your energy there. There are several ways to go about this, especially in the world of special needs. You have goals everywhere. You could look at speech goals. You could look at motor goals. You can look at social goals. You can look at the whole family. You can look at each individual member. You can look at goals that you have for yourself, and you can look at an overarching goal for the summer. Somewhere in all of that, you drown in thinking, I can't do all of the goals because it's hard to get even one thing done easily these days. So my tip here for thriving is to think about how you want to focus on one goal, whether that is by the individual in your family or deciding on one big goal that everybody works towards over the next few weeks. Simplifying in the times where we don't know as much is key to being able to take a step. If you have been on our calls for ministry, you've heard us say a long time that small steps will eventually make big progress. And we're a big believer that one small step and then the next small step and then the next small step will get you where you want to go. So the way that this has worked for our family is I decided in the beginning of the summer, what was the one thing that I wanted to focus on for the summer? Did I want to focus on pushing my kids to grow and develop skills? Did I want to focus on the summer being XYZ? Did we want to spend most of our time outside, spend most of our time inside? I brought it down to very basics. And one of the things that I decided as my goal was that I wanted my kids to experience a time of play without having to perform. And I will go into that in just a little bit, but creating a space for them to be without the pressure to improve. And then from that, I kind of worked out what did I want that to look like for each of my kids this summer. And I'll share more as we go. But decide on your one main goal, focus your energy on that, exclude all the rest. Just wipe it all away. There, I feel like in this particular season, it's very hard to multitask on anything, but especially with all the balls that we have been juggling. We've been church, we've been school, we've been everything for the last few months. And so creating a space where it's okay to focus on one thing and that is good enough. As a matter of fact, that might actually rejuvenate all of us is and can be a really helpful life-giving strategy. So my tip to follow up is to focus on what you have done and are doing to meet the goal. Don't look at the to-do list. Keep the to-do list. When you get the thoughts, I need to be focused on this, write it down. Get it out of your head, put it somewhere else, close the book. I have a blue book that stays beside my chair, and when I think of something, it goes into that book. And when I'm ready to focus on another goal, I grab the book and I look to see what the things were that popped into my mind as we were living life. And I realized, oh, we don't have that skill. Oh, we need to work on this. Oh, I really would like to check out that resource. I write it down. I keep my headspace clear. I keep everything in one spot. And then I come back to that to-do list when I'm ready to do the next thing. And so in that, my challenge every day is always to focus on what I have done instead of what hasn't been done. When I focus on what I have done and what I am doing, I feel the steps of progress, be it slow, be it maybe not all that I wanted it to be. I still can see that we're doing meaningful things in our family life. We're connecting, we're enjoying, I'm making space for them to be without the pressure to improve, which has been my summer mantra. So number two leads to number two, frustration. What do we do with the feeling of being upset or annoyed because we can't change the situation or the circumstance or the environment around us? So here, several origins of frustration. I think number one, COVID-19 and everything is a major source of frustration for everyone. It affects everything we do. It makes everything harder. I've talked with many folk across generations, those with kids and without, and by and large, what everyone still says is, why is it so hard to do the basics? We used to be able to remember what day it was, what meeting came next, all of the things. And the answer is some of these next things, but a lot of it is because we're just doing the very next to do, due to the fact that you can't plan ahead and get your head around a big picture plan. So number two, second origin of frustration is the relentlessness of the effects of disability. This is going to look different for every family, but I experience the effects of frustration, for example, when I have heard conversation that takes a lot of work to understand all day long, or is on a repeated theme. There's a lot of relentlessness to my brain when I'm trying to sort out, what did they just say? What was that? What was that word? What was that sentence? Was that actually what they meant? Or when I have heard one topic across a day, all day long. And I try to be really careful when I feel frustrated to label what aspect of the relentlessness of disability is this? What am I frustrated with? And how do I take that and pray that the Holy Spirit will help me have more patience and grace for the next 10 minutes or the next 1 hour or whatever it is that the hump that I'm trying to get over. We forget about the fact that the Holy Spirit is our helper. He gives courage. He gives patience. He brings the fruits of the Spirit to bear in our lives. That's the sole role of the Holy Spirit, is to be the helper. So do we call on the Lord in those times where the relentlessness really makes us frustrated? And are we okay saying there are really hard parts about disability that do make me frustrated? But what do we do with that frustration? What's the outlet? Number three, you may find frustration in the lack of access to services these days that are quality of life changing. That was true even before the virus, right? That you would get on a path and hopeful that this particular therapy service would really give you quality of life change, only to find that it was nice and it was good and there was benefit, but it didn't produce the quality of life difference that you were looking for, where you can noticeably tell you've made a gigantic step forward. Most parents can recall those moments in time where there was a certain service or certain providential unfolding of some aspect of help into your life and disability that really made a difference. And then don't we long for that to happen over and over and over again? These are the times where I find myself really longing for heaven. When I think about quality of life change, I think about wanting to be free from the effects of disability, wanting to be free from the effects of sin and longing, and that my heart was created for a better place, that my soul longs for that perfect place on the other side of the River Jordan, which is heaven, and that I'm longing to be with Christ when I am lamenting in this world that the quality of life change that I'm wanting to see isn't happening. But it can be frustration in the day-to-day. How do I take that reality that I want more, I may not get as far as I want, but I want more and I want quality of life, but I don't have access to that. COVID just kind of shut it all down for us in the sense that we didn't have school, we didn't have therapies, we still have such limited access that is of none of our own doing. You could have been on a perfectly wonderful path of progress and had it shut down. And then number four, again, loneliness in the process. And I think loneliness, if you can determine what aspect of loneliness you feel the most frustrated about. For me, it is that I don't have people to process what we're going through that have also gone through it. I lament that a lot. I wish and long for someone older and younger and right here in the same stage of life that I could look to and ahead and look behind and encourage and then walk with. But a lot of times those folks are not there in the sense that they exactly understand it. There's lots of folks who get a lot of it. But where you are and the effects of disability in your family are so personal to what God has placed in your lives. So what aspect of loneliness is frustrating to you? And labeling that and then thinking about how do we overcome it. I did the little Lego picture here in this lifeboat because this is often what it feels like to me when I'm frustrated, that I have kind of fallen off a cliff, and I'm thankful that the Lord catches me and he doesn't let go. Oh, love that will not let me go. I rest my weary soul in thee. That feeling is one of thankfulness that he doesn't let go. But I often feel like the Lego character dangling. When are you going to put me back on solid ground? When will my feet not feel like I'm in sinking sand? And sometimes it is quickly and sometimes it is not. So strategy for thriving. One strategy. What do we do with frustration? The most helpful thing that I have found across the boards, and have tested this on several families impacted by disability, was trying to focus on just a 2-week time period. Instead of looking at your summer calendar and saying, oh my, what will we do? How will we feel it? What if they don't go back to school? Look at the next 2 weeks and block off all the others. Don't even try to write stuff further than 2 weeks out. This has really been revolutionary for me. I self-confess still use the old-timey planner and calendar, and I took whiteout to my calendar in June 3 different times, and that was even with a 2-week focus. I had put things in and then times would change. We went from, just as examples, we went from Zoom Sunday school to in-person Sunday school, and then it changed days, and then speech changed times, and then there would be a meeting and there wouldn't be a meeting. And so no 2 weeks this whole summer, 1 week this whole summer has been repeated with the same predictability that is typical of our lives pre-COVID. So if you find yourself in that, don't look ahead past 2 weeks. Look at 2-week chunk. And if that feels like too much, look at a 1-week chunk and say, what are we going to do this week? And just cover up the rest of the calendar. Do next week in a few days. I think some of what sinks us is looking too far out in this season and feeling that sense of discouragement that you can't plan for anything, when really you can plan this week, and likely some plans can be made for next week. Number 3, fatigue, that lingering tiredness that's constant and limiting. So where does it come from? Several origins, not all of them, but several. Our brains are working really hard to do the basics. We're in that survival mode right now. I told this in an earlier church training that we went from doing ministry to thinking about how we set up chairs and how we communicate those basic details of entry and exit and interaction to a group of people who have varying viewpoints. It's completely changed church body life, what you talk about, how you interact, how comfortable you feel, what you think you can share. One person just this week was saying, I don't feel like I can even say where we've been or where we haven't been for fear of judgment. So those insecurities coming back up, that I've not done the right thing, or I have done too much, or so our brains are really working on those basics. And if we can give ourselves some grace and space to remember it's hard work to never get past number 1, it can remind us why we forget things and don't know what day it is and have to write everything down when we used to not. Number 2, everything in the outside world has gotten more challenging, has required much more energy to navigate. Number 3, any plan is subject to change. It's very frustrating, but it also can contribute to fatigue a lot, that you get geared up for one track and then the track changes. And then number 4, we're largely at home and we're doing the same thing day in and day out. And never underestimate how hard it is to be faithful in the daily mundane, especially the repetitive, the cook the meal, clean up the meal, keep them alive and keep them occupied, repeat 3 times a day. It can be very draining on mind and the body. And I chose the picture here in the life preserver of the boat in the waves because that's kind of what I feel like parenting is right now, is you row really hard to get over a wave, and you feel very successful about that, whether that wave is a meal or a book or a game or a walk or whatever, church, and only to find on the other side there's another one to row against. And it's just constant rowing instead of rowing hard and some placid still waters to enjoy. It just feels like a lot more work right now than it ever has. So, strategy for thriving. Focus on rhythms and routines that you can control. So I'm going to show some resources at the end that I love. One of the books that I will recommend talks a lot about rhythms in the place of the word routine. And I have really appreciated that. Routines can feel very defined and rigid, and even just in saying the word routine, it implies that you do the same thing in the same way over and over and over again. And we've all read the books where, you know, it takes 30 times to make something a habit or a routine. You may have children who are very routine driven, and then changes to the routine are very hard. And so the word routine has a very fixed connotation of what that is. And you may find it very discouraging and fatiguing to try to create routine right now when everything changes all the time. So I would offer the word rhythm instead. And rhythm is the flow of the day. Thinking about how we're wired to wake up, and we're usually at our best in the morning, both mentally, physically, and socially, we're at our best. The middle part of the day can have its own rhythm where we're slowing down, we're eating, we're kind of worn out from what we've done. It's a good time for a rest and a break. There's an afternoon rhythm, a late afternoon rhythm, and into early evening that feels different. We are back to able to do things again, maybe have a little more energy, but we're certainly not ready to go run the marathon that we were at 7 a.m. in the morning. Rhythm implies being more proactive about what types of things you want to do in those parts of the day. Instead of at 9 o'clock, I go on a walk, and at 9:30, we eat our snack, or whatever that looks like. Rhythms are more flexible and allow you to perhaps have a cluster of activities, which is what we've adopted here, a cluster of activities that we can choose from in the morning, between usually the end of breakfast and start of lunch is what I call our morning chunk. And I have those out in with visuals. I use real pictures these days for the boys. They really like to see themselves doing certain things, and that has really helped us to offer choice. So I lay out our morning choices, and I let each child pick one thing that they want in that morning rhythm. But those things that are offered are only offered in the morning chunk. And then I have a different set of things that I offer in the middle part of the day. And those are more fixed. Those are more parent driven for our family, where it's lunch, it's rest, it's certain things that we're going to do to kind of rejuvenate. Maybe we listen to a book. They have a chore or two. And then the evening routine is a different chunk of activities. So I've created rhythm for the days that make us feel like they're going somewhere, while still allowing for flexibility. They know that some mornings we will have things that we have to get out and go and do. And so I will insert those visuals into our morning rhythm. And when it's my turn to pick something that we're going to do, I pick the thing that has to be done, of course, and add it in, and we order them, and life goes on. Yes, it takes some time to acclimate. Yes, it's not the same as our visual schedule once was, where I had this, all the way down the day. But it has served us really well to think about a rhythm as opposed to a routine, because no 2 Mondays have been the same. No 2 Fridays have been the same since March. Number 4, anger. A strong sense of annoyance, displeasure, hostility. So I'm going to use this again as when all the things bubble out and we haven't had a place to process and we feel that strong emotion of anger. What do we do? The origins, collective buildup of everything during the day, pressures, needs met or not met, tasks done or not done. So some of this relates back to the Great Expectations. We expect that we should have met more needs, or we get frustrated that those needs weren't met, that the tasks should have been done, weren't done, builds up to anger. Number 2, the inability to share frustrations with others who really understand. And that goes back into that phrase that I used earlier, that we are afraid that we are too much for others. And so even in that, sharing our frustrations with others, sometimes we're so stuck in wanting others to be okay with who we really are that we don't dare share more of what we're frustrated with. We're just hoping that they will appreciate what is. And so we hold back. And I don't know how many on this call tonight have that feeling of holding back a lot of your life or your processing with others. But the more we hold back, the more it builds and the more likely it is to issue forth in anger. And then 3, creative ways, a lack of creative ways to build up and buoy the other parts of you. During my RTS days at seminary, I had the privilege of walking alongside some really godly professors, and they would always remind me that there were more parts of life than just the one I was focused on. And it was such a helpful way to think about the way I'm interacting with the world. We can be very tunnel vision, and especially in the world of disability, we can have our head down doing our thing. We're looking up sometimes, but we forget that there are parts of us that haven't had any attention for years. And whether that is old hobbies or old desires or just pieces of us that came alive in certain times and in certain ways. My family will tell you that there's a part of me that lights up when getting to interact with folks in a ministry context, whether it's a church or through Engaging Disability, that is very different than how I light up in other places and in other interactions. And I think just knowing yourself to know that there are lots of parts of you and there are lots of parts of your child and children with disabilities, or your typically developing children. And when one part gets over-exercised to the neglect of the other, you get out of balance. And when you get out of balance, you get frustrated and angry because suddenly you don't feel like yourself and you're not doing things that make sense to the world around you or to the people who love you. When really it's just that you have not been giving attention to other parts of you. Now, we could lump this all in self-care and say we all need to take care of ourselves more, but I find that so unhelpful in the world of disability because we know that we are caretaking more than we are taking care of ourselves. So my wisdom nugget here is that it's more helpful for me to think about what part of me could use a little attention that hasn't gotten any for weeks or months or years. And I find it to change season to season. For example, you'll see a picture in a few slides of what I wanted to bring alive this summer. And for me, it was a love of gardening. That was one thing my husband and I shared a love of before we had children. And then we found it very difficult to have a big garden when you had little special needs people around. And it's taken us years to get back, and every summer to deal with that small, silly little longing of, I just wish we had a big garden. But it's something that brings a lot of joy, and that seasonally just wasn't the right time to come about. But when everything shut down, we were like, this is our chance. This is our chance, and they're older. Let's see what happens. And so finding a little slice of an old part of your life that hasn't had attention can really infuse joy and deflate and diffuse anger. So 2 strategies here. Number 1, rediscover your why. I do this often, at least quarterly, if not each month, trying to remind myself of what we're about and why we're doing it. It is so easy to go off course. Parents of typically developing kids are in the same boat as us on this. without a lot of intention, a boat pointed north, facing any wind or any obstruction or any wave, is going to drift. And life is not perfectly still. When you point the boat of your family in one direction, it takes a lot of work to keep them pointed north. You will look up 4 weeks later and find you've drifted over here and you're doing things that you had no intention of doing in the month of June, but suddenly this is where we are. Why? Rediscovering your why each month or each quarter is so important to staying pointed in the right direction. Why are you doing the things that you're doing? And it might be asking that, why are we doing all of these therapies? What is our main goal? Or why are we committed to teaching our kids this? Or why are we going to add in these other things? What's our why behind this? Or what's your why in your job? Or what's your why in the meals that you cook? Or any other small thing that just feels out of balance. But for me, I try to do this in the big picture. What's my why? Why do I do all the things I do for and with the kids and in my relationship with my spouse? And am I pointed in the direction that I want to go? And if I'm not, how do I correct the ship before it's way over here and it's really hard to steer it back? And then number 2, do one thing in the margins of the day for a part of you that hasn't had much focus lately. I love thinking about the margins. If anyone thinks they don't have margins in their day, the most convicting thing to me is to look at the daily use feature on the settings of my phone, where it will show you how many times you pick it up and look at it and how long you've been on it. Every time I do that, I'm like, I have all these margins of time that I could use in a different way. It's very convicting. Yes, some of it is used for work, but a lot of it is a way to unwind or to connect, things like that. There are margins there. And so sometimes I will say, I want to decrease my next one step for me. I want to decrease the amount of time in that margin. I want to take it down 30 minutes. So what am I going to do for a part of me that hasn't come to life for 30 minutes this week and figure it out and make it happen? That's what self-care looks like in our world when I'm largely at home with 3 special needs kids. I will show you a picture in just a moment. Strategies for thriving in all of this. I would suggest 1 goal per person as you're thinking about your one next step or your one big thing for the summer. After you're kind of pointed in the right direction, what is your 1 goal per person max for this time of this season of life? Number 2, remember that you determine the pace, or the pace runs you. I like to set the pace for my family. I don't like it when the pace of life drives us either too slowly or too quickly. Before the virus, I felt like the pace of life was always pushing us along faster than I wanted us to go. Then everything shut down and I felt like, well, wow, the pace of life has slowed to what I might not truly appreciate. So determine what pace you want to go and how can you add or take away things to achieve that pace. If it still feels too busy, pare back. If it's not busy enough, what can we add in towards meeting those 1 goals for each person that would make a quality difference, either in joy or skill or whatever the big picture goal is for you. Number 3, I am a big believer in still letting kids be kids. And I put this in here because I feel like it's a whole different battle with special needs kids. What does it look like for your child to have a place and a space where they can be themselves, fully themselves, stimming, spinning, talking, loving what they love without being always corrected or motivated or with a growth goal in mind? When I think about pushing myself to grow, I think about when I become so focused on that's all I do and I really want to get something done, it can have a lot of anxieties connected to that push. And a lot of times when we're trying to think about changing ourselves, we focus on it and then we give ourselves a break. Then we focus on it and then we give ourselves a break. But we may not do that with our kids. There may be parts about the things that they do that are very frustrating, or that we are constantly working to help them change for really good reasons and with really good strategies. But do they ever get to be themselves without correction and just immersed in the things that they love, or immersed in childhood? And then number 4, I think writing down your expectations. What expectations at this point in the summer do you still have for your summer? Write them down. Even the ones that you know are crazy, but that are still hidden somewhere down in your heart. The vacation that isn't going to happen, the trip that you wanted to do, the whatever that is. Even if you know it's going to be a no, writing it down and then being able to write out or claim or star, I know these things can't happen. Paring it down to what can happen, revisiting it a week later is a trick that I do for myself. I write down my expectations and I close the notebook, and then I come back in a week and I pare it down. What if all of this can't be done? I'm really bad for trying to add little things in. And so when I think about the pace and the expectations for our family, I'm constantly trying to cut some of those out so that we can still go steady in the same direction. Summer reads to encourage slower but purposeful parenting, summer parenting. These were just some loves, some recent loves. 3 of them are, well, 2 of them are not from a Christian perspective, but I think they're very helpful for special needs kids. 2 of them are written from a Christian perspective. Let Them Be Kids, Adventure, Boredom, Innocence, and Other Gifts Children Need is just a really good read. It's not a hard read, but it's so encouraging to just remind ourselves that there are slow pace aspects of life, which we're in right now, like it or not, that are really good for our kids and that develop good things in them. Seeing How Worship Transforms Your Life, Family, and Church. If y'all have followed along, I have shared openly that I have loved going each week to Keith and Kristen Getty's family hymn sing, and it has really motivated our family to learn a hymn of the month and to really be more proactive in how I approach teaching lots of language in a hymn to kids with language disorders. I love this book. I think there are nuggets in it that will encourage and inspire and just get you pointed in the right direction if that is an area where you think, I'd love to have more hymns saturating what we do. Because truthfully, music does inspire and it keeps our head and our heart pointed in the right direction. 5 to Thrive. This one I added in for siblings, especially. I have had a couple questions recently about siblings and seeing things pop out in them. They're angry, or they're hurt, or they feel like they're not getting the attention they need, or they're just demanding more. 5 to Thrive is a really good look at what are core needs and how do we meet those core needs in any child. And what do you do when you're not meeting the needs? So it's helpful in seeing if you know that there are certain behaviors popping out and you're just not really sure where they're coming from. This might be a good place to kind of ground you in saying these behaviors might be linked to this core need. And maybe there are some small steps we could take on our own, maybe different than what she lays out, but on our own towards meeting that core need deficit. And then simplicity parenting is one of my old classic loves. And this is the one that I was talking to you earlier about, the rhythms. It's the whole premise of using less to raise calmer, happier, more secure kids. And I found it so beneficial for special needs kids who often get overwhelmed or don't play appropriately, don't have long attention spans, don't necessarily entertain themselves well, are more digitally wired. And so for us, it's not a throwing out of the digital, it's a thinking about how do I work towards a place where they can do more independently on their own in the real world without the digital stuff. This book will really encourage you a lot. And then I did a couple of favorite things for kids. I just thought it would be fun to toss out some of our favorites right now to give you ideas. I've shared before the podcast God's Big Story has been a huge hit for kindergarten through later elementary. We don't use this in place of family devotions, but often my husband works late and I'm doing the third meal of the day by myself with the same 3 people, and we've all been in the same house. It's not like we have new things to talk about. So we use the podcast as our exciting thing when he's not here to listen to while we eat supper and then talk about it. They love to listen to them again and again. They're very slow, they're very thoughtful, they're repetitive in what they offer in each one, so kids get used to the format. I would really encourage you to take a look at that. There's 22 episodes now. They've been adding to it. I wanted to show you a couple of creative ways that I am trying to have fun but still work on things. So with my one down in the bottom left-hand corner, the one thing that we have really tried to work on creatively is developing a love for that pencil. Doesn't like fine motor skills, but loves trains. And I read the newspaper regularly, and he gathered the idea that it would be great fun to create a train newspaper. So it's something we work on. We roll it up, we put it in the newspaper bag, I sneak it out there, and then they get to go get it like it's a real newspaper. We read it, we print the pictures. Lots of times it's me using my yellow marker to write the words, and he traces over them. So just thinking about creative ways to build skills in fun, give them space to be themselves. I don't change trains, we just build on it. Use things of old. Looney Tunes has been my go-to for building language. They don't do a lot of talking in the cartoons. There's a lot of sequencing that goes on in those cartoons and trying to understand the actions that you're seeing, another skill that mine don't necessarily have. And it's been really fun for me to go back and see the old cartoons, and they're all free right now on Amazon Prime. So it's a good way to do something you enjoy, introduce them to old characters, build sequencing and language to go along with it. Pause it. What's happening? And then you fill in. Discrimination skills, a love that we have is the camping version of Spot It. We are not a big fan of shapes and numbers and letters in this game, but this version has camping equipment on every card, and you are trying to spot different things of camping equipment, and it's been a home run for little boys, just tossing that in as a freebie. We are continuing to work on the catechism. I do it at night with the boys at the dinner table. We just go slowly and we just stay at it every week, 1 or 2 cards a week. And so I have this top picture here. They like now flipping their own flashcards, so they get to hold them and flip them, and I just kind of mediate the process. Those are sold in our store if you don't have a set and would like one. Down in the bottom, you'll see the love for gardening came back out. I'm all about keeping hands busy, but I wanted to put this in to just spur your thoughts on the concept of repetitive tasks. So we think about them in task boxes most of the time in the school setting. Things like putting erasers on pencils, or packaging knife, spoon, fork together in a napkin, or setting the table, repetitive things that they can do independently. But here we have shelling peas, which had to happen. My husband and I did the hard part. We peeled them apart and we opened them up and we set them down. It was 10 times harder than us just doing it, but we set them down, and then they would rake the peas into the pan. And this just made everybody thrilled. They could all do it together. They thought it was just so fun to be part of what we were doing. And I was like, fine motor, check it off. Repetitive activity, check it off. Real life skill, we're building something they can do on their own. This new book, Handcrafts, up here, don't let that intimidate you, but they're very delightful, easy to do crafts for kids. If you're looking for something out in the real world, like with sticks and bugs and things like that, go for this book. You won't be disappointed. And then just a freebie down here in the bottom, I bought these Walmart $4 tackle boxes, and we have been collecting rocks. And we each have our own rock collection, and we are having so much fun. And it is something you can do, and all of the kids, if you can pick up something, you can have a rock collection, and everybody can make it what they want to make it. And we take turns sharing our favorite at the dinner table. And it is so small, and it costs $4, and it just reminds me to delight in the small things. So viewing progress in this, how do we view progress over the course of time? Doing the daily is one way to measure progress. We are doing 3 meals, we are keeping people alive, we are doing everything in between. And that is like, give 5 thumbs up for just doing the basics. But then if you still feel the need to be able to see progress, this is something that I have fought against from way before children. When I went into ministry in my early 20s, I had an older lady pull me aside and say, you need to do something in life on the side where you can see start and stop progress. Because when you're walking alongside people and doing ministry and in hard places, change is slow, and you won't always see what you want to see in terms of progress. There's not a, you don't walk away with a finished product ever. And that's very true with our kids with disabilities. They're never finished. So what is it that you can add, the small addition to life that would bring joy? This is my small addition. This is my little bitty garden outside the back door. And there are 4 tomato plants, there are zinnias, there are lots of weeds. There's some lavender and some peppermint and some garlic, lots more weeds. But this is my start and stop in the spring and the summer. I plant it and it grows. And I go out there and I cut those flowers and I put them in a vase on the table. And I enjoy the fact that I put something in the ground and God did the work and grew. And it reminds me that we're in this growing process ourselves, and he's doing that. He's bringing flowers, he's bringing tomatoes out of our life to the Spirit, but we often can't see them as visibly as this little bitty plot of garden can. So what is it that you can add? It might not be growing things. It might be sewing. It might be reading. It might be taking a magazine, reading the newspaper, watching the news at night. Whatever that thing is that has a start and a stop, that you have a sense of, I've done that and I've accomplished something, can take the pressure off of the rest of life, which may feel like there's not nearly as much progress as you would like. And lastly, but not least, adding creativity to the norm. So just some thoughts, just random ideas to give you things to think about. One thing that I've enjoyed a lot are wireless earbuds that hang around my neck. I can have them hanging when I don't need them, walk around the house, they don't fall off. But when I want to listen to a podcast or hymns or sermons while I'm cooking or while I'm cleaning up or while I'm on my walk or out pulling weeds, or I'm coloring with the kids, but they are doing their own thing, and whatever that looks like, I can pop one in and I can encourage my heart if I'm having that frustrated moment. Bluetooth speakers we love around here. I am not as much of a Alexa fan in our house because we have screaming that goes on at her. She will play a lot for us, but there is a lot that words do not communicate well. And so just having something that you can play and start your morning off, or add to your rhythm, songs, audiobooks, hymns, has really changed the tone in our family to have music as the background. I don't know if you've heard of playaways. These are new to me, but I love them. They are preloaded audiobooks on MP3 players, and they're available at almost every library. So you check them out just like a book. And for special needs kids who like to push buttons and can't, don't want to load things on a Kindle or just want to listen, you can get wonderful audiobooks. Check them out, pick them up. Most libraries are doing drive-through or drive-up service where they bring them out to you. Request them on holds and pick them up, called playaways. Backpack coolers might help you get outside the house. This is a recent love. Again, just a freebie to throw in there. I try to think of easy ways to get myself motivated. Carrying all the stuff, keeping special needs kids cool when it's really hot. We're in the deep south. It's a real challenge. My kiddos with autism don't regulate well in heat, but a backpack cooler has really helped us a lot. My hands are free. I can carry a lot, keeps it cold, and we tend to stay out. I take it with us even when we go into the backyard. Make a comfy place to sit. I can't tell you how many families I've talked to have said, I can't relax. And I will say, well, do you have a place you go that's like your little cozy corner where you sit, and that's your spot, that's your chair? And so many will say, no, I don't really have that. consider the fact that sometimes we don't stop and rest because we don't know where to sit, and we don't want to sit amidst the clutter. We don't have a place that we go. And then last, add in treats for you. I'm a firm believer in positive reinforcement, even for the caregivers. And so from activities to groceries, don't forget to insert you into the plan sometimes. It doesn't mean that you have to insert you into every plan, but the tendency is the main caregivers usually think of themselves last. And that is not bad, but where can you insert yourself in a little bit more and bring that part of life back that has been missing for a while? So here is our closing verse from Hebrews 12, 1 through 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. So again, reminding ourselves that the race that is set before us is one that has been run before us, and that the victory lies with Jesus, that he ran a much harder race and he ran it with joy for me. And therefore, let us lay aside all those things that weigh us down, and let us cling to the author and the finisher of the faith, who is Jesus. And he will impart that joy into the very mundane things that we're called to do along the path of this race.